Steven here, and for once I'm in the same room with Adrian and Jason, and we are bringing to you the CodeSpells update for this month. The first item of business is the monthly competition, which we have not had a chance to look into. I'm sure there are many awesome submissions. We will be announcing the winners this week on forums. Let's jump right in to talking about some of the actually major changes that are coming up that we're in the middle of now, actually. But to motivate those changes, let's look at where we were a few weeks ago. Adrian, what are we looking at right now?
Yeah, so we started this month the idea of extending the world to have multiple islands because we wanted to extend the size of a single island. We felt that it was restricting, and we wanted to start building the weather simulations. And the idea was that we were going to make it so that the islands themselves would transfer weather across them. So you'd be on these small islands, and they'd have very distinct weather situations, different temperatures, whether they were raining or not, and that was our way of abstracting it away. And we actually built it so that you could jump across a bunch of islands, and it just felt really not nearly as exciting as we thought it was going to be. It just felt disconnected in a way that we didn't like.
Now, these are actually fairly small islands, right? How big would you say that island right there is?
This is about half a kilometer wide.
This is the size island that people have been playing on. So I mean, this is the build that's out there right now. You play on basically that island. Right?
Yeah, and there's enough to do on it, but it's not. It doesn't feel connected in a particularly. It feels restricting in terms of large simulations that we want to build, like water flowing and stuff like that. And you can actually see how we were cheating a lot of stuff like the clouds and stuff here, which is pretty cool.
Right.
But we did build it so that you could arbitrarily jump across islands, and we had a bunch of connected islands, and it just...
Yeah, and they were kind of interesting. I mean, like, each one was different.
Yeah, and we had them have different amounts of water and different settings, and they were all different seeds. So it definitely felt like you were going across islands, but they didn't really...
It felt a little bit like our ideas. We wanted to convey the notion of going on an epic journey, and it felt like, I don't know, I guess just like you're a little bit claustrophobic on each small island. And long story short, we just decided to make the world a lot bigger, which was something we had, I mean, just thought about doing early on, of course. And the reason we decided not to have a huge world was because it's tricky to simulate fluids, like, for example, water on large worlds. But I think Adrian has some cool solutions for that. But do you want to show actually the kind of prototype of the larger
Yeah, we can transition to that one. The other thing was that part of the reason we wanted to do the islands was because we felt like it was more clear in terms of gameplay also. So we had to kind of go back and make it more... We had to rebuild a lot of the things that for weather simulation and stuff, and how we're going to build them to still be clear, but on a continuous island, or on a continuous map that's much larger. So we can go to the other one.
Yeah, we're doing good. Somebody was saying, so I was looking at the chat, someone said it was frozen, but I think it's not. It's not frozen for me, and it seems to not be frozen for them.
Yeah, I just checked on it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. So yeah, okay. So this is a different terrain, and it's kind of hard to tell because we're in the editor. But how much larger is this than the island we were just looking at?
So this is about 4 times the width and height, so it's 16 times the area, so the other one would probably fit around right here. We can jump in and play it. This is also, we've started building all the simulations, or rewriting all the simulations to be to not really care about the size of the world either, so we should be able to extend this very large distance. We won't be able to go infinitely far, but we should be able to go far enough that it would take you probably between 20 minutes to half an hour to run across the whole map. So we can make much, much larger maps, whereas before it would be...
So 20 minutes to half an hour to get from one side of the map to the other. That's
Yeah.
actually very significant. Because if I'm not mistaken, that's about how long it takes you to run from one end of Skyrim to the other. Is that
Yeah,
about
yeah,
right?
I think that's something like that. I don't know. I don't know how fast you run at Skyrim, but it is around 5 miles wide.
Yeah, it's 5 miles wide for Skyrim. So is it the case that the goal is to get to about the size of Skyrim for the CodeSpells world?
Yeah, I mean that seems like a good upper bound. Part of the thing is we want to simulate water and weather patterns and stuff like that, and we feel like if we get too big, it's going to be hard to even understand what's going on with the world. So we're not too worried about making it that much larger than something like Skyrim. But if we can achieve that size, I think we can. That's kind of the scale that we say. If we can achieve that size, we'll be super happy. And every mini game that we're envisioning, or the things that we're envisioning being able to work in the world, should work really well.
So you mentioned weather patterns. What kinds of weather patterns are you envisioning?
Yeah, we're going to start with rain. So we're going to have cycles for heat and humidity. We did build some simulations for those, and we're kind of rebuilding them now with this idea of a larger map. So the idea with that is that an area would have heat and humidity, and those can transfer across the map. So rain clouds can move across. Water evaporating does create these clouds that then travel across the map and create rain in other places once the conditions are correct for causing rain, once it's saturated enough. So
it seems to me that having weather systems is something that would affect air wizards, or maybe all wizards. I don't know. How do these weather systems play into to magic?
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about how to build out the interactions with the elements for the different ones, but we've talked about air having some sort of ability to change the direction that weather is moving. So if you have a thunderstorm, you could use air magic to, at a pretty large scale, redirect parts of a thunderstorm. Whereas water obviously creates water, and that feeds back into other simulations, and it creates this loop. So creating a storm is not a matter of, if you want to create a rainstorm, then you have to do the proper things with the world to evaporate the water to create. You have to create the conditions for it, and then you can use all of the elements to build that weather phenomena, and then you can move it with air.
So I'm sure there are lots of ways, but what is one way that if you wanted to create a rainstorm, what could one do?
We haven't figured out the details, but I mean, you could evaporate water in a
Using
region
fire magic.
Yeah, using fire magic or creating some sort, bringing in some sort of plant from another region that would increase the heat of the region, and that would increase the whole region's heat, which would evaporate more water. You could also find other ways to evaporate the water, but that would create clouds above the region. And once it becomes saturated enough, you have clouds that are part of a rainstorm, and then once you move them and they fall into conditions that no longer support the...
So what it sounds like to me is that with this larger map, there's a much bigger canvas for gameplay. You not only have what you had before, which is kind of this ability to affect the micro world around you, but you have the ability to affect a huge area of land. You could weather systems is one way. What about terraforming? Will there be the ability to terraform?
Yeah, we're still we have the ability to deform sand, but people haven't been too excited about that. So we're going over that and iterating on that some. So we're gonna come back with some new stuff for terraforming. We're not exactly sure yet what yet. We're still talking about that. But you will still be able to terraform the terrain in some way.
So Jason, also with this larger map, I suspect there will be a lot of room for different kinds of terrain or different sorts of environments that you'll encounter as you're going across this map. Can you sort of paint a picture of a few possibilities, possible places you'll encounter as you're on a journey?
Yeah, I think first of all, I have to say that thank you to our community for understanding that the game is in progress. And for example, what you're looking at here is a kind of visual step back from where we were before on the smaller islands, and that's because we haven't placed the textures properly yet, and we haven't figured out sort of how we're going to handle this giant terrain in terms of painting it, and we're going to solve those problems, but this is just sort of a really big gray box test that we stuck a texture on. But I wanted to point that out because it does seem less colorful and rich than the other one. I'm really looking forward to figuring out ways that we can procedurally generate things like canyons and valleys and basins where water could collect and form lakes, and we could, we don't want to let the terrain sort of dictate what type of environment it is, but we're hoping that when we implement all the systems, different types of environments will start to form on their own, which is exactly what the goal of the game is, so that enough water collects and you get a lake, and a little bit of water collects in pools and some plants go around there and you get something that is closer to a swamp, and no water is there and it's very, very hot and you get a desert. So we are going to work very hard at making sure that different environment types form on their own. Just like if you go out west, you have deserts with huge mountains. Not all deserts are flat sand dunes. We want to have that sort of variety of different types of environments, like a mountain desert terrain, or a tundra terrain with mountains that would be slightly different, or a forest that is on a mountain that grows up the side of a mountain to a certain altitude. So we're really hoping we can get some cool emergent stuff out of this, and it won't have to be so isolated onto an island or a smaller terrain.
And so it sounds like water is actually a key ingredient for the kind of environment that gets generated.
Yeah.
And so that actually gives a tremendous amount of power, it sounds like, to water, to the water element. So you could, tell me if I'm wrong here, you could add water to a place, and if it was previously a desert, it may actually become something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's cool because the actual shape of the terrain will, in a lot of ways, end up shaping, or they're not really biomes, but if you think of them as biomes, like the shape of the terrain will decide where the water goes. So generally, deserts will be flat because the water does not collect there. And the combination of the elements of the heat and of water and how the air is moving, different weather effects and stuff will end up creating those different regions. So it's not necessarily like, they'll end up creating regions to the map naturally, and they'll flow between each other really just completely naturally.
Right. So I can see a lot of ways that this larger map will affect single player gameplay. I mean, there's just so much more you can explore, more variety you can encounter. And I know multiplayer is pretty far off, but and so anything we say right now might be a guess. But can you paint a picture of what the ramifications for multiplayer might be, given that the size of the map is much larger now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to what we originally had planned with the separate islands, where there's just multiple people on a map. Um, but I mean, I think it allows you to be a little bit more fluid and being able to see the effects of another player at much farther distance without just makes it a more natural.
Yeah, and I think it
continuous.
also makes you feel more powerful. Like,
Yeah.
if you're affecting larger systems that are affecting a larger world, doing that with or against someone else would feel really cool and powerful. Like, it would change something like a co-op sort of game mode as much as it would like an adversarial game mode, which would be really cool because you just have more to play with and you're affecting a larger area.
And so your changes actually could be very catastrophic. I'm just realizing, like you might come to an area and add water, and it was a desert, now it's not. But that effect might actually ripple out all the way across the map. It sounds like because now there are more trees in an area, and maybe that does something weird with the humidity, and then some weather system comes through, and maybe changes other areas as a result of that. Which sounds really, really cool, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want people to feel super powerful, and we want their code to feel super powerful. So we want them to really see the effects on a big scale. It also, it just sort of goes back to the fundamental idea we have about making a game about wizards. Is that the big part of being a wizard isn't just that you're casting spells, but it's also that you really are in tune with the world around you. So you understand how your actions affect the world around you, and the more you understand that, the more powerful you are.
Right, so there's a micro level and a macro level to being a wizard.
Yeah.
To borrow from the real-time strategy.
Yeah, and we've always wanted that thing, and we felt like the best way to do it previously was to separate them on the island level and at a world level, but after trying it out, we realized that even in terms of gameplay clarity, it just feels much more powerful and natural to do it all on a single continuous map. So
right, right, and I know you made the decision to switch to a bigger map like maybe a week ago, so that's why the texture hasn't been fixed, and I imagine the simulations are in a definite state of flux because I assume we have to almost rewrite a lot of it from the ground up, because the assumption was that the simulation only had to work on a small map, and now it actually has to work on a much, much, much larger map. Is there any possibility of showing off even like the earliest prototype of a system, like the water or some kind of fluid simulation?
Yeah, we have the water somewhat working. I mean, it's still it's in Earth magic for whatever reason.
Now, is getting water to is working on water magic the plan for this next month?
Yeah, if we want to get the game, we want to figure out terraforming and water and get it back to the same level that it was at with before the change to the large map. So by the end of the month, everything should be back to on par with the smaller island map, except that we will have better water. This might be interesting. Let's see what happens. So the water is not textured or anything, like I said. We just kind of
just working on how it flows. Essentially.
Add a little spring right here. Crazy water.
That is doing some crazy stuff.
And you can see it flowing down. There's still some issues with the scale of it, but look. Made a pretty cool water that. And obviously this is not textured or doing anything of that sort.
And it is flowing down the mountain. And actually, okay, so now I'm seeing how this does qualify almost already as terraforming, because visual glitches aside, that is a lot of water that wasn't there before. That's like you almost created. No, you did. You created a lake with really big lake. a few spells. I mean, that is awesome. And so there's no life or foliage like we showed last time, but this is a large area that just got affected, and and there would, like Jason was saying, be ripple effects or chain reactions from this kind of magical act.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
very cool.
We'll have to work some on conservation of water because I don't think we created this much water. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine that if all of this was whatever, like if it was all a desert down there, it's just completely changed now, just from a single effect that happened way across the map.
I don't know of another game that does fluid simulations at this scale. I could be wrong. Do any of you know? Or maybe someone in the chat knows? Put it. I'm just curious. There's, you know,
I don't
totally,
know. I mean,
there's totally allowed to be another game that does it. I'm
Yeah.
just curious.
They're almost always localized and faked. I mean, 99% of games just have a flat plane for water.
There's no
It doesn't
fluid
even
at
move
all.
at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, like From Dust did some stuff like this, but it was in a very contained, smaller environment. Something like Minecraft does it to an extent, but a lot of it is simplified to around you. It's not. It's built into the procedural part.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily going to go that far. Like it is built specifically to not travel that far.
Right.
Have that far of an effect. So
Right.
this is going crazy. I think we're getting some.
we're getting some diagonal water
Yeah.
planes.
This is just.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you for showing this off, even though it's at such a early stage. I mean, I know you've been working on it for like, maybe a matter of hours, maybe a couple days, right? But
we got the mesh working this morning, so it wasn't even rendering the mesh properly this morning. So it's getting there. It is starting to look better than the other water in terms of how it works. So that's exciting. We just need to, again, like the goal for this month is to just get everything back on par with what the island was, the smaller island was.
Yeah.
So if we can get to that point, we'll be in pretty good shape.
Cool. So speaking of new stuff, I think Jason wanted to show off something that he's been wanting to work on for a long time and has just started.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, once again, you guys have been super patient about the character. The character that we have in the game right now is a total placeholder that we bought from the Unity Asset Store so that we could, have a wizard running around. And as much as we are very grateful for the creator of that character, because, we bought that thing and we've gotten some mileage out of it, but it's not what we envisioned for the game. So my goal is to create a character that moves and flows around the environment in an almost effortless way and feels very much like a magical creature almost. Like the wizard that you are should feel inherently magical. So we're focusing a lot on cloth and how to get sort of like faking cloth in the game and getting these really beautiful flowing robes on the character. Right now, our plan is to not really show the face of the character. I feel pretty strongly that like a character like the one in the game Journey, which has a really beautiful character that is totally androgynous, very non-specific, just kind of moves in this really beautiful way. We kind of want to get that across, and we want the player to be able to, have a little more choice in what the robes look like and what their staff looks like, but we don't want to get too much into creating like faces and stuff like that. So
will the player actually be able to customize the way the robes and cloth looks?
I mean, we would love that. We haven't built any of that. I mean, this is just a sketch that I did this morning. So
at least to some level. I mean, we're gonna have multiplayer, so we are gonna have some.
Yeah, we'll have differentiation between the characters for sure.
Yeah.
But the most important thing to me is how the character moves and sort of to give meaning to the robes of the character and the staff that the character has. So the character, we want the wizard to feel like, wizards always wear these in traditional fantasy, wizards have these like robes on, and then in video games, wizards usually kind of don't have robes on because there's not really a good way of like showing all this cloth and stuff in a game in real time. So we're trying to come up with a clever way of rendering out the robes and and recording, baking those like cloth simulations down. I don't know where it is. There it is. So I just started building some of the robes and layers and doing like a simulation of the cloth in 3D. And hopefully what we want to be able to do is build like multiple layers of cloth on the character, bake those animations into the characters running, jumping, sliding, whatever animations, spell casting stuff, and then be able to sort of fluidly transition between them so that the robes always feel like they're in motion. Ideally, you should be able to see the wind blowing through the robes. You should be able to tell the direction of the wind by how your robes are moving so that it doesn't feel canned, it feels very alive. And also, we want the robes to feel almost like a piece of equipment in that it's part of the reason why you can jump off mountains and slide down hills and safely jump into the water and not worry about it. We want the player to not worry about moving through the world because we aren't building a platformer. We're building a game where your focus should be the spells you're making and the crazy powers that you're wielding. So the character, the plan for the character is that it should be androgynous and should feel like the expression of what you want your wizard to be like without it having all these sort of fictional things attached to it.
And that also, it also includes the controller of the player. Right now, it feels a lot like, we built it very quickly, so it feels like a lot of other third-person games, and we want it to feel more fluid in the way that you move around and the way that you jump. We want it to feel. We don't like the idea of it feeling hard to get up a mountain and stuff like that. It should feel like it is if you go to a large mountain, it should feel like it is a large mountain, but it shouldn't feel like that necessarily.
Because you are a wizard, it is effortless for you to get up.
So we're coming up on our 30-minute mark, so we are going to wrap up soon. I have a question about the robes, but I just wanted to say before I ask the question, if anyone else has other questions, they should type them into the chat now. So that once Jason answers my question, we can go through any other questions and we can actually wrap up at a reasonable time this time, because I know some of our other updates have run a lot longer. We always shoot for 30 minutes, and sometimes we've gone over an hour. But so my question is, and maybe you've sort of alluded to this before, but do you think that there will be different kinds of robes that might have different effects on gameplay?
I don't really want it to be a game about collecting robes, but that's certain that we haven't really figured that out. I for one would prefer it if the robes felt like a universal tool that allowed you to exist in any environment, so that if you move through different environment types, your robe kind of dynamically alters itself to feel like it's more suited to it. But the idea of the robes is that they are kind of a universally comfortable, warm or cool sort of outfit that like suits almost any environment. So we were toying around with the idea of changing the material on the fly and stuff like that. But to be honest, we're still using that store-bought character, so those kind of implementations are a little bit of ways off. But we want the character to feel like their robes and the way they move and everything like that is really cool. Like Adrian was saying, like in Skyrim, you run up a mountain by like hopping really fast, and it looks ridiculous because you're this character just kind of like hopping up a mountain in this weird way, and we want you to be able to hop up a mountain and have it feel fluid and magical and cool and not out of place. Like, well, of course I can hop up a mountain. I'm a super powerful wizard. Like, so that's.
And if there is an area you can't hop up, it'll be clear.
Super obvious why you can't. Yeah.
And I do know that we will be making staves that have at least some kind of gameplay ramifications, if I remember correctly, because that's one of the things we promised for the Kickstarter. Do you want to say anything about staves?
I mean, once again, it's another thing that the player will be able to change about their character in a very kind of effortless way because it's something that will just be in their hands. So it would be fun to make a bunch of different staffs, and it's another thing that we can use to modify the gameplay experience, or simply for aesthetic purposes.
Right.
So,
Right.
well, I mean that will all depend on the type of game you want to play in CodeSpells. Like if you want a game where you're powering up a staff, it's very different than a game where everybody has to be on the same level. So
Right.
like you don't want somebody to go into a multiplayer game and just wreck everybody with their super powerful staff. You want everybody to kind of we want multiplayer to be about how clever your spells are rather than just how cool is your staff.
That's true. And Adrian, I know you've talked about supporting modding and the ability for other players to create their own mini games. And so it very well may be the case that in one sort of mini game, the staff and robe are highly relevant and do something, and in others they are not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can do whatever like that. Yeah, we want to open it up so that those things are up to the game mode. So it is completely relevant to whatever you are setting up the rules of your game mode to be. In a lot of ways, we're building a platform, like you called it. It's a platform to create games inside of, so it'll depend on what you're playing at the time.
All right, well, let's go through and answer any questions that have popped up in the chat. The first one I see is, are there going to be different soil types? Adrian or Jason? Different soil types.
We talked a bit about, so we haven't decided yet. We aren't super sold on the idea of sand. We like the ability, we like having some other fluid apart from water that has some physical effect. So we want to do something similar to that. We've talked about making the rock layers somewhat deformable as well. So we're not sure yet. We're finalizing those details, and we should have a very good answer for that by the end of this month.
Right.
There will definitely be ways of deforming the terrain. The level of detail for that we have not finalized just yet, but we will do that in the next coming weeks.
All right, so I assume that answer also applies to soil going to be able to absorb water.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, we've talked about the idea of doing something in between sand and rock that would be some sort of dirt. We've felt that would complicate the design in a lot of ways, so we're not sure. We'll definitely have some sort of evaporation, so we're thinking about doing potentially different types of fluid apart from sand, like lava and stuff in the future. So if we don't do it now, it might be something that we do in the future, like a special type of sand that absorbs water.
Yeah, but I mean, on the basic level, the idea that terrain that has a lot of water on it will definitely have a different look to it than a terrain that has no water. So, ground that is around, like the actual terrain around a lake will not look just like dry, arid desert. It will, we definitely want to we want to sell that, like, this is the ground that plants can grow out of instead of just being things.
Cool. All right, so I think last question. Will there be features that only people who purchase the alpha can use once the game releases beta or after?
I mean, we have the staffs. I don't recall doing anything else on a Kickstarter.
So staffs definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know. We have to think about that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not against the idea. I think that our early backers are the most important people in the world.
Yeah.
We would not be here. We wouldn't be here having this conversation if not. That's interesting. I mean, at the very least, the alpha users' spellbooks will be larger because they're on the forums now, generating and sharing cool spells. So when if you've just bought the game and you don't know how to code and your spellbook has like 2 pre-built spells in it, then you're certainly not as powerful as someone who's been coding spells for a long time. That's kind of the interesting thing about CodeSpells is your power increases, based on what you know, like how much you've learned about CodeSpells. It's going to be a complex game. Coding is inherently complex, and the simulations work together in interesting, complex, subtle ways that you're going to have to figure out. And we've always wanted your power as a wizard to grow with your knowledge. So at the very least, there's that. The alpha users will know more. But I do like the idea of having something else. So yeah, we'll have to think about that.
Yeah, we'll come up with something, or at least something to give to the alpha users before other users.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
It's actually experience-based. That's true. Yeah, it's fun that it's a game where the player levels up.
Yeah, like in real life.
Yeah, the player levels up in real life, which is really cool.
Yeah,
I like Diane. Shout out to Jim Henson.
Yeah.
Definitely, probably the biggest artistic influence on the game is the Dark Crystal.
Right. Right. That's like the best compliment you can
I'm
give to
really
Jason.
glad that somebody's like, oh, it reminds me of a Skeksis. I'm like, oh, all right.
I remember we actually sat down and watched the Dark Crystal before we started coding anything.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was my pitch for how the game should look.
Yeah, that's right. That's awesome. Okay, well, cool. We didn't actually go too much over, so I'm happy about that. Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you, Adrian and Jason, for sharing your vision. And we will be back in a month.
Yeah, and this will be...
Code Glitch asked if the contest thing, he must not have been at the beginning.
Oh yeah, Code Glitch, we have been super busy. We haven't had a chance to look at all the entries and choose winners, so we will be announcing the winners this week on the forums.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Adrian? Sorry. Yes?
Oh yeah, no, I was just saying that the update by the end of this month should be a lot more substantial. Like we're finalizing a lot of stuff, so it should be by the end of this month we should have a lot of really cool.
So you're saying they should expect big things
Yeah.
in a month. All right. Way to build up the pressure on yourself. But all right, cool. I'm excited about it. All right, thank you everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Cool.
Ladies and gents, thank you.
Bye.